If we take 1% as a working number for prevalence of psychopathy in the general population, we could always argue that this is such a small number, why even bother? The problem is that these people move around a lot. They're always looking for victims, and they find them. So they go to the watering holes, to the feeding grounds, they go where the action is. Chances are that virtually everybody in our society is going to come across and be affected, influenced by one or two of these people in his or her lifetime.
It doesn't sound like a big number until you think that that's 1 in 100 people. In the average movie theater, when you go to see a movie, you're sitting in a room with 100 to 200 people. So it's quite possible for you on any given day to bump into somebody who has a psychopathic personality.
People would assume that because I've worked with this particular concept, psychopathy, for so long that I could spot them from 100 paces, and the answer, of course, is that I can't. I'm no better at it than most people. You cannot determine to what extent somebody might be psychopathic simply by looking at them, even talking with this person for 5, 10, or 15, or 20 minutes. Sometimes it may even take 6 months or a year. And the problem is that we continue, as a species, we're sort of programmed to do this, we continue to evaluate people the way they appear to us.
We tend to be very forgiving in our interpersonal relationships with people. We're often open to their explanations and their rationalizations, and we give forgiveness. We also, when building a relationship with people, believe that they are real. What a psychopath does is they weave a picture of a person that's really a dream. It's a spirit, it's not real.
And you feel like you've discovered a soulmate, a deep intimacy. And you're experiencing one of those rare, fleeting moments that makes life worth living. And before you know it, you're involved in a deep personal bond with a psychopath.
Once you're in that bond, we call it the psychopathic bond, you don't want to break it. And it often amazes the friends who are watching from outside. You're still with him, or you still believe what she said, or can't you see is very common. And they really can't see because of the strength of the bond that's been built. Now, when the psychopath is done with you, they leave. They've never had a bond with you. It's all been a game. And so they just stop playing and move on to the next target. You're left with all these open wounds because you thought you had a relationship with this person. And it could be a business relationship, it could be a business partner, it could be somebody who you're married to, or a personal relationship, it could be a family member. And when it breaks, it hurts. And that's the psychological and emotional abuse that a psychopath, feeling no empathy, no remorse or no guilt, just moves on to the next target.
It's the guy in the movie, what is that movie? Where he's in the shower and he kills the lady.
Horror movies about him.
They kill people.
Insane.
Murderer.
Killing. Maniac.
Criminal.
Killer.
Somebody like Charles Manson.
For many years, it's been thought that the psychopath leads a terrible life, that they're not successful. The downward spiral was often mentioned in textbooks. But now we know it's quite different for many psychopaths. And maybe it's because they have greater access to education. Every psychopath that I've met has had a college degree and a couple have had PhDs. So there's greater education. There's the ability to look corporate, to look like a business person, as opposed to what one thinks of as a serial killer. And somebody with a psychopath can put on the costume, talk the language, and have the certificate on the wall, and easily convince somebody who owns an organization or is hiring for an organization that they are the ideal employee. Over the years, we've coined the term corporate psychopath to describe this particular individual. They share the same personality disorder, but we want to make them somewhat distinct so that people don't confuse the serial killer with the corporate psychopath.
I think in the past, psychopaths flourished, but not nearly so much as they are right now, because the conditions have changed over the last 25 or 30 years. We had the introduction of the internet, for one thing. We had all this trading that can go on at arm's length. You know, you can make a trade involving 100 million people at one time rather than doing it face to face. We have the collapses in the financial world, starting in the United States and other parts of the world now. You say, well, it was economic conditions. Well, I'm not an economist, so I don't know what had happened. But like everybody else, when I read through this stuff, I say, hold it, there are a lot of decisions made by individuals along these lines, and who are these individuals?
It would be very difficult to identify who they are because they blend in. When you are talking about making a business decision, most businesses are risk averse, or they want to manage the risk when they make a decision, whereas a psychopath will do something risky just to see what will happen. Making a decision that others would have taken a long time and a lot of data to come to, they'll do it on a whim. And because they are fearless, it could even hurt them, but it doesn't bother them.
We mostly accept the view that our society is shaped like a pyramid, where a minority of the people at the top make decisions and laws for the majority at the bottom. In the year 2000, the richest and most powerful 1% of the world's population owned 40% of all global assets. The richest 10% accounted together for 85% of total assets. And in sharp contrast, the bottom half of the world's population divided between them barely 1% of global wealth. Now, it's not surprising when you remember the game of Monopoly. At the beginning, all the players start out as equals, and in the end, one person owns everything. Few people today know that the game was invented to demonstrate the strong tendency to concentrate wealth in the hands of a few. It goes to the inner roots of capitalism. With wealth comes power.
You can't talk about psychopathy without bringing Bernie Madoff up. Now, I don't know whether he's a psychopath or not. I haven't evaluated him. I don't know of anybody who's done a formal evaluation on him. But anybody who can destroy the lives of tens of thousands of people, including close relatives and friends, is not your normal, loving kind of guy.
In the spring of 2010, we heard back from Professor Hare. For the first time in history, his team was able to fish for psychopaths within the highest ranks of management at Fortune 100 companies, at the very top of the pyramid.
We have a new study looking at corporate psychopathy. It's the first empirical study of this sort. Now, we had all sorts of anecdotes and we speculated, and even in Snakes and Suits, we would talk about individual cases. It's unusual because, to my knowledge, it's the first study that was able to use a well-validated measure of psychopathy with a lot of high-level executives. We have access to 203 senior management executives, people who were selected to go on to further management training. They were considered fairly high potential individuals. The results are actually rather fantastic. The distribution of psychopathy scores in this population of high-level executives is about what you expect in the general population. What differs for this group is that there are more people with really high scores. And some of them, I think 8 or 9 of the 203, had scores as high as the threshold that we use for research purposes to diagnose psychopathy, that is 30 out of 40. And this was kind of surprising to us, and we had a lot more who had scores of 25 or higher. These are very high scores. Here we had people who had very high scores in psychopathy, very psychopathic, and yet were seen as good employees, high potential executives, and whose performance was exceedingly bad, and yet they were still rising up to the top. We had several people who were vice presidents of their corporations. We had others who were directors and supervisors, high-ranking positions, and yet they had all the characteristics and qualities that should actually doom them to fail.
So what's it like to be a psychopath? You never have to feel guilty or ashamed again. Never. None of those sticky, uncomfortable situations. Responsibility? What's that? It's actually funny to watch when people cry. All you need is to smile at them, and they'll think that you're the nicest person in the world. You're so cold and analytical, and they don't even have a clue. They can never guess what's going on inside your head. You can do anything you want.
What happens in an organization is that the psychopath can mimic the high potential employee. And so they hide amongst this group of individuals. And high performers in organizations tend to get more resources, they get more training, they get bigger projects, bigger budgets, more staff. All the trappings of corporate power, which is exactly what the psychopath, who's a parasitic predator, is looking for. And it is unfortunate for the organization on the whole that the psychopath can do this. What happens in that small group is that the psychopath realizes that all of the other high potentials are rivals or potential rivals and begins to take them out through manipulation, lying, backbiting, all of those kinds of behind-the-scenes activity. The organization then begins to lose this cadre of high-potential performers. They either leave of their own volition, or they're set up and they're fired, or they're sent to another division where they're out of the way. And then the psychopath has taken control. So yes, they do have an advantage because of their personality. And it really is up to the organization to set up some control mechanisms, some monitoring mechanisms to be able to differentiate the true high performer from those who only look like that.
You could probably see it at the world level. You're thinking of governments, government leaders, and I see no reason why somebody who is very, very psychopathic couldn't end up as a leader. We've had this many times in history. You can go right back to the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians and just trace them all the way through, and many of these people clearly would qualify as psychopaths. But given the times and the context, they did fairly well. Now, a lot of people suffered because of it. And I think what's happening right now is that if we value what these people are doing, or maybe to put it another way, we don't actually pay attention to the bad things that they're doing. We look at, this is terrific, the guy's he's doing this, he's making lots of money for us, and our popularity around the world is increasing, we're moving our armies around, and we're getting all this prestige and so forth, but people are suffering.